Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution we know we need. Welcome to the studio, Isla. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Good morning or afternoon. My name is Isla Jerowsky. I am one of the media representatives for the Canadian Socialist Rifle Association.
The Canadian Socialist Rifle Association. I know a lot of people know about you, but there's going to be some folks out there that are just going, what? Excuse me now? Can you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the Canadian Socialist Rifle Association is kind of an organization that's in Canada now. We aren't directly affiliated with the American Socialist Rifle Association. We are our own entire entity, founded officially back in sort of 2001, 2002, but with organizing efforts going back several years prior. We're mainly an organization dedicated to the promotion of various topics surrounding firearms, its use, the legalities around it, as well as encouraging other things such as just general self-defense, organizing to help out the community, things to tackle just different social issues, and various other items that the left may consider to be integral and instrumental to what would be just a normal functioning society.
I love how you were quick to distance yourself from the NRA, because I imagine that's people's predominant opinion of what a rifle association is and what it's about. And well, maybe not right now, public enemy number one. I mean, but next time there's a massive shooting in the United States, they do kind of maybe take the place of Israel for a moment as public enemy number one. But yeah, so that's what I kind of meant when some people might sit up a little straighter and wonder why there would even be a need for a socialist rifle association, because I would think the folks who didn't know you existed might be under the impression that the left is, although we argue about a lot, that there's one thing that we are all on the same page with, and that is that guns cause death and that they're bad things just in general to stay away from. And I'll be honest, so full disclosure, as we go through the discussion, I definitely started there. I still don't like the idea of my kid playing with a toy gun, but I think a lot of that comes from knee-jerk reactions that I just harbor, also just being told and accepting the narrative around guns and gun control.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest priorities for us as the CSRA is promoting the education surrounding them. It's extremely important that people are educated around them, whether you don't even wish to be a firearms owner yourself, which isn't our requirements to be a membership within our organization. You don't need to have your license there. You don't necessarily need to be a direct firearm owner. It's a scenario where that kind of education can be extremely important to people who don't come across them often, if ever. Knowing about them, knowing their safety, knowing everything to have that in regard. So if there's ever a scenario they do come across one, they're well versed in the safety of something like that. It's extremely important.
Now, I feel like you're talking from a real practical sense. You go to a place where there's a gun and you know to handle it safely, to put it away, or heaven forbid, use it if needed. I'll be honest though, my mind shifts on this topic and the possible scenarios in which you would need gun knowledge. Again, not even just to use it as be a gun owner, but how they perform and other things that would be useful, because I feel like the worse shit gets, the more scenarios I can imagine in which a lot more people need to understand guns, also from a self-defense perspective, because we talk a lot about protesting on this show, and increasingly we're talking a lot more about the interactions with violence that occur, and that's kind of hard to talk about sometimes openly, right? That's what makes people a little bit uncomfortable.
It absolutely is. So sometimes these conversations can come up and they can be uncomfortable, but it's important to know where people, sort of stand where they are. Canadian legislation really doesn't permit, the acquisition of firearms for self-defense purposes, and necessarily you should never be acquiring a firearm for strictly self-defense purposes. This is a clear-cut stance. Obviously, self-defense comes in a lot of different variations, as I had sort of mentioned. This can be anything from community support, but obviously as things are transpiring from a politically driven perspective, one of the big things is if there's ever an instance where you do happen to come across one, it's imperative for us and everyone on the left to understand firearm safety. You can come across them by accident, especially if there is a protest and there's something that gets dropped on the ground, or this is something that you come across, is a scenario that is rare, but not completely implausible. So having this kind of knowledge could be important. Again, for children to have that knowledge, no, you don't necessarily have to take them to the gun range, but if they go over and their friend has a BB gun, that can be just as sort of dangerous in a sense and just as impactful to their safety. So having that kind of knowledge of handling them and safety and care and where to sort of point them can be a really, really important thing. And that's super important for us just on a firearms perspective as an organization, especially as the political turmoil is getting as dicey as it is, so to speak.
The topic of self-defense is an interesting one because, I mean, it's not only just not a thing for guns. It's not, you can have a pocket knife, but the second you use it for self-defense, that's against the law. Or, any blunt object that is in your possession counts as, use of a weapon in self-defense case. I don't think I think there's a lack of knowledge about those rules within Canada. Like, I think people are often surprised to hear just how restrictive it is. But so, the same kind of, I guess, concern, fears that people might have, well, they can apply to a variety of things far beyond guns.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the big issues that people will hear the word self-defense and assume just immediate violence, like immediate danger to your person, but they're not thinking about the housing issue as a big issue, right? In terms of homelessness, the larger drug issues that we have at hand are a big one. Police interactions and brutality can be a big issue in terms of their ability to be, have a sort of prerogative and imperative, like, purpose to what they do, being sort of the vestiges of capitalism in and of itself, right? So these are minor things that really can be incredibly important that can, keeping those in mind and keeping a way to work on those items specifically can really actually help reduce some of these other overall problems, and not just thinking of self-defense, especially when you hear that word and constantly thinking immediate danger to my personal safety, but think of it as a constant. Your livelihood, your ability to, have a home, a stable home in some regard, is it can be just as important in a sense.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I guess, different uses of the word violence, right? People always use violence as kind of this physical act when, violence extends far beyond that. Poverty, I always say, is a type of violence. We talk about social murder. We talk about, these indirect things that are just as violent as the physical act of violence, but that don't really get, considered in the same light.
Yeah. I fully agree, and it's something people need to keep on the top of their head if they hear that word, and that's kind of a big thing that the organization, especially when you join into it, really promotes and pushes, because it's not just, of course, there's talk and there's ideas and different collaborations on stuff like that, but just kind of keeping that in the mind for the members and stuff like that, and our community organizations, that this can be just as much of a self-defense thing for organizing to help out the community in terms of food distribution or clothing for the homeless and those in need as well. Like that can be just as much of a self-defense for the community, which can make a huge difference.
I don't want to sound combative, so there's your warning. So I get it, but then I'm reading on your website, it's not a totally inclusive club because it is a Socialist Rifle Association and you have some restrictions on membership. No judging, right? Why the need to distinguish yourself then as a socialist gun club if the focus is strictly on, like gun safety around that and the law around that? Because usually people are trying to create a big umbrella as possible if it's to an issue like this, right? You could get a lot of people on the right wing to relate to some of these issues, but, you maintain yourself as a exclusively Socialist Rifle Association. Why?
Yeah, honestly, that's a fair question. The reason being is traditionally right-wing policies and politics don't permit the sort of consistency with humanitarian lifestyles. The fact that it is deeply rooted in, both a capitalism and right-wing ideology really go hand in hand, especially once you start teetering into the extreme rights of fascism and stuff like that, become exclusionary in its own regard. Whereas the left wing in this particular one, the socialist standpoint comes from being part of a giant, bigger community that is generally intended to help more. So that's where our exclusionary part comes in, simply because we don't allow people who have associations with in any sort of ideologies of homophobia, sexism, transphobia, ageism, any sort of religious discrimination, again, or expressing your sympathy or support for stuff, things like fascism or right wing. It can be exclusionary in that regard, because we're generally excluding the people who are exclusionary in and of themselves as an ideology.
I get you. It's more about creating a safer space based on that kind of ideology that we understand socialism to be most of the time. Not all progressives are progressive, but I feel you can understand why, and I can understand why throughout your website as well. I think there's a few points where you have to repeat yourself that you're not a militia, because once you provide like an ideology and then pin it to a gun association, images conjure up, right? And again, I'm not judging. But I imagine there is that element. I understand the law in Canada. Well, I probably don't understand the law all that, because I'm not a gun owner and I haven't really been all that involved in any kind of advocacy around it. But like, putting the law aside for a moment, I mean, if you want to bring it up later, but we often have discussions on revolution and what that could or would or has looked like. And guns are a part of it. So in an association of socialists, I imagine surely the discussion comes up on militias, on the need to maintain arms. In the same way the right-wingers in the United States use their amendment.
The very, very strong Second Amendment. It's repeated constantly by them.
Right, and a lot of them use the justification of its origin of a government that would needed to be overthrown. But then I also feel like you're kind of distancing yourself away from this, and I can understand why, but do these discussions come up? Because they do here.
Well, generally they don't, and obviously what members sort of do outside of the main banner underneath the Canadian SRA is we're very strict on our stance. A lot of this has to do with one, we advocate not the use of firearms for violence, which is obviously goes hand in hand with not starting a militia. But then two, there are the negative connotations just from a governmental standpoint. We are a nonprofit federal agency, and so these kind of topics and stuff like that generally aren't conducive for continuing to grow and bring education. Obviously, members can talk about things in their own regard. There's a lot of talk of just sort of social revolution, which isn't to your point, but in terms of any sort of militia and use of that, we're very clear on our stance on firearms to be used for violence is a very big no-no.
So I'll start with I believe that people should have access to guns. A lot of my beliefs are rooted in that of the Black Panthers. So I'm not saying we start militias, but that's my foundation. But one thing that for me personally has always made me hesitant to go pursue a gun license or anything is my struggles with my mental health. It's I've been in places and that's a real concern. And in a lot of socialist organizations, I've noticed in the past, there hasn't been enough of an effort to look out for each other's mental well-being. And oftentimes these are spaces that actively can damage our mental well-being. So I kind of wanted to ask, is that something that you guys talk about to check in with each other because that risk is different when there's something that makes things much easier, you could say, right? I guess that's a concern.
Of course. Honestly, that's a fantastic question to bring up. Yeah, mental health is a huge issue for myself. I've had family members suffer very severe of it. I've had family members take their own lives because of things like this. And it's something that really comes across personally as a big issue. And the group as well is so exceptionally aware of this. In multiple channels, Discord is one of the main communication ones. So joining the group, you get access to the full Discord and all the various committees and channels. The way we operate is on a full open disclosure policy. So every conversation, even between committee members, is open. It's open to view, it's open to see, so everyone can. And there are various pages of strictly mental health support for aid, for resources, for people to talk, for people to come forwards with their struggles. It's a huge, huge issue. And this is one of the things that we are concerned with tackling in terms of, again, that self-defense thing. Canada, under this capitalist system, does not provide support for people with mental health issues. A huge social structure that is completely collapsing in and among itself as every year more funding gets taken away. So we recognize this is a significant issue. We want to be there for both our members and community just outside of us. It's not just within ours. We understand this is a huge significant issue, and we definitely want to tackle it at every aspect possible.
One of the, well, while you're having to defend gun rights, I'll just throw another one at you, okay? Because I know you prepared for this, so I'm not.
That's why I'm here. That's literally
Exactly. Okay, because people are wondering the same thing. So, especially in leftist circles, the discussion of preventing domestic violence is often brought up hand in hand with gun rights. Even liberals, when talking about it, it's one of their main concerns. Well, they say it's one of their main concerns. We don't know what they're really concerned about, but either way, it's the justification used, and there's obviously no arguing that domestic violence and femicide are a massive issue in Canada, and for the large part, firearms are involved in these tragedies. So, what do you say to leftists who, or anyone really, who sees restricting access to guns or various other pieces of legislation that have been suggested or introduced, that are usually decried as taking guns away from people? But I mean, do you have alternatives, or what's your argument to that, basically?
Yeah, and it's obviously a sensitive topic in a lot of regards because it is on the rise. It's an unfortunate sort of plague that is going on. Domestic violence doesn't get the addressing it really should in a lot of regards. Sometimes we hear about it when it's far too late. So a lot of the legislation that allows you to get a firearm now is kind of very prohibitive. It does take a very long time. It takes months and months for you to acquire a firearm, for you to go through the background checks to get a firearm, for you to then follow up. There's between the course, the OPP, if you're in Ontario, or the subsequent other provinces. And then the RCMP does their own checks, including various background checks following up with previous X's and stuff like that. And there can be checkups as well. I mean, that is one thing that could be done to sort of tackle this issue significantly, as well as illegal firearms are a huge problem in Canada. I know that's always a cop-out answer for certain people who are blanket gun rights without any sort of advocacy, but that is a big issue. Even in my local area, there have been several seizures, just within the past week, of loaded firearms that are completely illegal. And I think one of the things is more checkups, more supports for mental health, as well as more supports for people in these situations to get out without needing to secondarily explain yourself as to why you might need a protective order or why you might need to get away. I find a lot of these issues are dismissed by police, are a big problem. They're just dismissed as, oh, it's no big deal. It's a small kerfuffle. Things will be fine. They let them go, and there's no other follow-up. So these are another issue for this to happen without worrying of a blanket pull away from the guns. Like, there are so many other underlying issues that we could definitely do, including various more checkups and stuff like that, and following up, specialized committees and stuff like that can follow up on these particular issues when these arise, if they're brought forwards.
I like how you say specialized committees and not increased police funding.
No.
In order to enforce these gun rights. I imagine that's...
It is a audible podcast, but I am clenching my teeth hard. People who say more police budget. The city of Toronto gets how many billions a year?
Is it 1.2? I think it's 1.2 billion, something like that.
Oh boy. Yeah, and then my therapist costs $120 an hour.
Oh, they do good work.
Oh, absolutely. But that money should go.
No, absolutely. But that's another way I feel like you folks are distinguishing yourself from, we'll say it again, the NRA. Is there a Canadian equivalent to the NRA? Is there just a Canadian Rifle Association that you folks just maybe could do without, or do you guys
No, I mean,
are you guys friends?
no,
Like,
no,
I wouldn't think so.
no. I mean, I won't say in a sense that, necessarily we're enemies for certain political reasons. But the thing is, the NFA is the sort of variation on the NRA, but it's within Canada's perspective. I'm not super familiar with their inner workings for a couple of understandable reasons. But it is something that we definitely distance ourselves on. It's by no means an inclusionary environment. Anyone who's ever seen anything to do, the words NRA generally doesn't follow them doing a homeless food giveaway. Like, it's usually not those, like, there's a whole list of things. So generally distance ourselves.
This is a bit of a different kind of question, but do you support Arsenal because of the gun?
Because they're called the Gunners.
Because
you have to explain the joke to the audience, people.
So I'm currently wearing an Arsenal shirt right now, and there is a Gunners sort of like plaque on the wall. I do not support them simply because of the cannon. However, I do absolutely love them. They are playing today. This wasn't a clever. This was not a clever ruse for marketing.
Trademark infringement.
I will tell you though. As soon as I turned the camera on and I sat down, I went, "Oh shit."
Look like such a keener. Guns.
Oh, it's bad. There are firearms that I do have on display, but then there's I just like, wow, this looks.
We weren't gonna mention the guns on display. I love it. You said it. Yeah, a wall of guns behind the Gunner fan.
Yeah, it looks like a weird advertisement.
I'm taking a screenshot. It's a new meme.
Perfect. It's absolutely perfect. So yeah, I'm quite a big Arsenal fan and stuff like that. One of the reasons why I actually became a really big fan of that is the community around it, as well as they have always championed pride rights. So LGBTQ plus, they have been one of the biggest ones for international support, like across all of their supporters clubs. So I really enjoy that in a club when they take a social stance like that and don't shy away from being open and honest of what it is, and especially acknowledging where the pride months and stuff come from. Acknowledging the Stonewall riots is huge.
I don't know how to transition from that back to the topic, so I'm just gonna go back to guns.
Sorry, I was holding that question in for like 4 questions because I'm like, it's not the right time.
It's always the right
Things
time.
Things are too serious right now. I can't.
But I want to talk about going into kind of progressive spaces as the Rifle Association on the left. And what is that like? Are they always receptive? I mean, will they give you a booth at some of these conferences, or what's the reception generally like? Because I'll be honest, even someone suggested you folks as a show, and we were like, okay, do we do this? Yes, we want to talk about them. We want to talk about like anybody organizing to good ends, but at the same time balance that, because we do often talk about escalation of tactics, and we didn't want it to be perceived that this was the natural escalation, was to then bring in the gun club. So there was hesitancy around it. Mm-hmm. What's it been like trying to coalesce the left around this?
Yeah, I just firstly want to say, like, I really appreciate you bringing us on. One of the reasons my role was created and voted upon with 2 other members is to provide that outreach, to provide that information to people of what we are and how we do, because sometimes our communications can come across as exactly as you had thought. This is all I have to go on. This is the website. I don't know. Is this part of it? So some left communities and organizations are extremely receptive. Some of them maybe less so. And the goal in our regards is outreach. I mean, obviously, you can't force every community, organization, or program to sort of accept you and love you and understand your message. But one of the big things for us is to provide the outlets, to provide the ability to outreach and let them know what our message is, let them know what we generally are about our stance and our sort of mission for, again, community-based self-defense. So some are very receptive. Some, obviously, by any means, not so much. Obviously, liberals are not as receptive, but I dare to call them left.
It's probably the socialist in your name. It's different camps for different reasons, right? Like, someone reads socialist in, you know, an NDP convention, they're like, oh, and then they see Rifle Association, like, ugh. And the Liberals, they see Rifle Association, and maybe like half of them are like, okay, I'll listen. And then they see Socialist, and they're like, ugh, right? So
it's so true.
don't worry. I mean, the audience here, I think they're a little more receptive, but I get it. I get it, especially if it's going off those that you try to distance yourself from, right? Without exposure to what you folks are doing, then that's just going to be an assumption, except they're all commies, right? Or tankies. You know, I imagine that's the assumption, that you're a bunch of tankies just itching for an armed revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just waited. Like, I mean, we've already kind of talked about that, but
yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, we do get them from time to time. We are the group is growing quite significantly, quite rapidly, which is fantastic to see. We've had one very, very successful community group organization with our members where we donated thousands of dollars worth of socks and other wear to people in need. We've got another one coming up for the wildfire season. So these kind of outreaches are helping us sort of try to get into these newer spaces and showcase, like trying to work on things like getting booths and trying to work on going to things like conventions, which will help us sort of spread the message, but also help us, you know, gain more membership, which can help community organizers kind of have a centralized way to organize. You know, like that's really, really important for us. So these groups can know, like, hey, we want to help. Like we really want to help what you're doing, your activism, and in those ways. So I think we're getting much better receptions as time goes on. But obviously, yes, there's that connotation. Hitting the word socialism will already trigger a significant group of people.
that's okay. Let them be triggered. I got like just a blunt question for you. Should we be encouraging more gun ownership?
I don't necessarily think that we should be encouraging ownership. I definitely think we should be encouraging people who are considering ownership, because some people may never want to. They may be for the gun rights. They may be very advocate for it, and people can have them, but maybe don't want them. I think if someone is thinking about it, then definitely should definitely take those steps and start doing it and start looking into it. I think we should encourage everyone to become familiar with firearms. I think everyone should be familiar with a firearm, whether or not you want to support them, own them, shoot them, ever have them in your house, or ever see them again. I think everyone should effectively be familiar with them, because they are going to be part of everyone's life possibly at some point. And in some cases, it's much nicer to know about them and their uses and the safe way to deal with them than anything else. So not necessarily encouraging full ownership, but definitely encouraging those who are considering it.
One thing about gun ownership that I've been thinking about more and more lately, you could say, is, you know, with food affordability being what it is the use of guns for hunting, right? And one element of that I've always really, you know, that has led to me being on the side of defending, you know, gun rights and stuff is also like indigenous sovereignty, right? Like because indigenous communities are far more likely to use hunting as a way to acquire food, right? And I think I think it's important for people to maybe, well, people who are comfortable with it at least, to have like the avenues to be able to consider that as a way, like hunting, fishing, whatever it is, to be able to get food.
Yeah, it is paramount for some communities. People do not realize how rural you can get. I mean, I'm in the middle of a city, but 2 hours north and there's not a street light for 30-40 minutes. And well, no, you're still probably 45 minutes away from an awful Loblaws. It doesn't mean in these rural communities that's not the case. This could be your main source of food throughout the year, main source of food for your community, and especially indigenous communities. Yes, it's super important to have that ability to be able to provide that. Fishing isn't always doable.
I'm sorry, I'm also giggling because when he started talking about the food insecurity, that's not where I thought you were going. Even though you had warned me, you know, I'm just those steal from Loblaws posters keep popping up. And I was like, Santiago, I think that's inappropriate, but that's just where my mind's going. I'm so sorry. Just never mind. But
I mean, that would have thrown me off a little bit. That would have been a little bit of a different question if that was how the direction was going to go. So fair.
But I want to ask you about the way your email signs off. I think I mentioned it to Santiago. I was like, I don't know what to expect. Did you see the email? Did you see the email? They sign off with always point down range. And so unpack that for, like, obviously I've never been to a shooting range, but I get the idea. I've done archery, so I get it. You just shoot only at your target. You don't point it at a friend, right? A loaded or any gun. But is there more to that statement than that?
So that's kind of a reminder to sort of make sure you know, obviously, where it's going, where it's heading, and sort of a fun little, like, play on it, a fun little life lesson to sort of kind of keep moving forwards and keep kind of progressing. So kind of keep going downrange, right? Don't sidetrack yourself and don't kind of go off. So it's a little bit of a double entendre in terms of always remind yourself to be pointing the dangerous item downrange where it's safe, but also to make sure that you're constantly going downrange. You're constantly going towards your target. So, and in that case for us, that's, the community building that we're trying to achieve.
You talk about that a lot, mutual aid, and your website talks about other skills beyond gun safety. I imagine first aid perhaps is one of those. I mean, anytime you're handling guns, we want to do it safely, but that's another thing that I think, gun ownership aside, that we should be learning a lot more about. So are folks receptive? Do you hold classes?
Yeah, we actually have. We've had several different courses and stuff like that with people who are our previous combat medics, or people who have sort of, I don't want to say battlefield first aid, but very, very intensive first aid experiences, not just, oh, you scraped your knee and here's how we can wash this up, but quite significant, injuries and stuff like that for first aid. And this is stuff that is really important for us because obviously, yes, what we're doing is dangerous, but a lot of our members like to do other activities. They like to go, if they do go hunting, knowing first aid can be the matter of life and death between you and sort of the hunting party that you have, because you could be miles and miles and miles away from even the closest variants of support or even cell phone service. People who are activists and who are going out, we see a lot of the political discourse that's going on. Knowing first aid can be really important and really, really important in those scenarios. So it's really big for us. We love running courses. We've had a great reception to them. They're a ton of fun. They're kind of long. They can be kind of long, but like any course like that and stuff like that, you want more information versus less information. So definitely had a good reception with those.
We should have started off with this, but we didn't really get much of what the Canadian Socialist Rifle Association looks like. Its reach. Would you consider your coast to coast?
Generally, yeah. So we range from absolute coast to coast. Our current sort of organizational structure is we have a central committee. There is no set hierarchy. There is no set person. We will generally run elections once every 2 years, and every role can be elected upon. Myself as well. I was the elected representative along with 2 others for this particular role, and it's important for us to have that. So everything has to have a majority say within the organization itself, which is a huge part of the socialist aspect. In terms of our outreach, yeah, we go from coast to coast, and we're working on various chapters depending on the size within it, right? Our main headquarters are out in BC, so this is where we are federally registered. In terms of that, we do have an organization in Ontario trying to create a chapter up and going. So it'd be nice to see chapters in the future, but as time goes on, we just sort of have our sort of main central committee.
Maybe I'll come to a question as I'm saying what I'm thinking, but whenever you're talking about stuff like, guns that are quite popular on the right wing, like it's so often that the spaces to talk about these are filled with like insane people like on the right, and I think because one thing that like I do as a hobby is like I go airsofting with my friends, and that's filled with a bunch of right wingers, though it is fun to get to shoot literal police sometimes. But anyways, yeah, but like same thing with like like knives and with different things. So I think there is a like in defense of like the value of it being like literally named like the Socialist Rifle Association. Like it's like I think that's part of what's important about the distinction is because these spaces are so often filled with really, really, really right wing things. And like we talk about on the show a lot how like we're held to a different standard a lot of the time. there's literally right-wing militias in Canada like that. You guys are constantly have to defend it. You're not a militia. There are active right-wing militias who don't have to defend themselves nearly as much. We're not held to the same standard. Whatever we do on the left, we're held to such a higher standard, right? So I guess a question could be, have you guys been approached by, the RCMP or any really police in general about, like, with suspicions about what you do? Like, has there been any process like that?
There's not necessarily been like any formal inquiries. Obviously, these questions do come up. We don't really fly under the banner, when we're going to events. If members go to protest, we're not permitted to fly under the banner in that regard, because it's going to get those negative perceptions no matter how we do it. We've obviously had questions, pop up from time to time, and they have come our way. Nothing that necessarily like a formal inquiry, but it still doesn't mean that we don't get our set of hardships. The ability to acquire just a standardized bank account for the organization for donations and committee spending and stuff like that. The unbelievable struggle and nightmare of getting just a simple nonprofit bank account set up as soon as you say the word socialist, and then rifle. It becomes very, very nightmarish. So it's definitely, you're right, not the same standard by any stretch of the imagination, and it's one that we do struggle with, but it's one that we're obviously committed to doing, and we find our ways around it. A lot of the members have been very instrumental in helping with a lot of these problems because of the knowledge there. But yeah, there are so many roadblocks compared to other groups who have more nefarious open air intent than we do.
We're smarter about that shit. But they have they have a no cops rule, yeah? I read your kind of rules for meetings or whatnot. You don't allow cops in your organization, do you?
Absolutely not. So we have a very, very strict set in terms of what is not permitted in terms of membership. And we can pull them away at any time. And a lot of them, there are effectively three main points, and that's to do with the fact of any history with sympathizing of fascism or support of fascism or reactionary politics like that, participating in any exclusionary like social ideologies, as I had mentioned, ableism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, stuff like that is a huge one. But also, employment, with volunteered or paid or whatever it is with law enforcement. So, correctional officers are part of that, probation officers, because the issue is that in and of itself as a system is built to sustain and maintain capitalism. So it completely goes against our ideologies as an organization to be community-based and support community.
I like them. I see it as, the fact that you do so much mutual aid, and it's not like entirely, not that you fully justified in focusing on your focus, but to me it feels more like a gun club, but like in a community sense. And I know that name in the title gives you such grief probably, and it might be necessary to distinguish yourself. I get that, but it's about any of us that we would create a book club, and we would do it in the model in which we know is healthy, right? And that happens to be a socialist model. There are other lenses you obviously apply, like anti-colonial and all of this. But that's the feel I get. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's just like people who feel that gun safety is important, that there's issues around gun ownership that need addressing, but that you've coalesced around this and formed what is any other community organization that would provide mutual aid and connections and just healthy discussion spaces. Is that right?
Yeah. The community is what provides us the ability to have this group and have this coalescing. So providing to the community and making sure the community is a better place is almost a duty in and of its sense, and should be for almost everybody. You should be focusing a lot on your community, and with that comes obviously our obligations.
Yeah, I was far more judgy going into this, and I apologize for that, but I just wasn't sure what to expect. And that's not to say that I'm discouraging people from forming groups that do discuss other things, right? That's not, that wouldn't have put me off your organization at all. It's just the commitment to the values that you've threaded throughout it, right? To do whatever your ultimate aim there is around gun rights. But I'm glad we had this discussion, because I imagine there's other people that are like me and just like sitting in the unknown with the NRA as our only fucking example of what a gun club looks like. I would say you folks are akin to a tenant rights organization, in which we have to find mechanisms that connect people based on, if it's geography, where they live, where they work, we understand unions, or what they're interested in. And especially gun owners on the left, I imagine, can be ostracized in a way where it's not cool to go out and be like, oh yeah, I'm the gun toting peace activist. It's so to have a space where folks can just not face judgment for this, and I think it's a respectable thing. Like, not that you need my seal of approval. I'm just kind of letting my inner thoughts come out into the mic. But I mean, that's what the podcast is for, right? I appreciate, Isla, like, you really humored our kind of points too. I knew you expected, and you are used to having to defend the organization and also explain it, like we're in kindergarten, because
it's a normal thing, and it happens a lot. And that's one of the reasons why we found that this particular position that I'm in is really imperative, to be able to provide people with the information. And this isn't necessarily because one person has to be set. It's because most of everyone else doesn't want to be on camera. It's a lot of it's, they don't want to do that, but they're the first ones in line in a lot of the outreach programs, and being out there face to face and being the real front of the organization and stuff like that. So it's really great to be able to come on and actually, like, showcase really what we are. And I'm super excited to be on here, and I'd be happy to be on anytime.
Oh, good. Do you have any calls to action that we can share with the audience? And before we sign off, Santiago, do you have any last questions for Isla?
So basically, anyone who's kind of thinking about joining the Canadian SRA, wants to know a little bit more information, can absolutely head over to our website at canadiansra.ca and basically check it out. Membership is exceptionally easy. There's just a couple questionnaires that you do have to fill out. Then you will be invited to the main Discord channel, allowing us to, explain everything, how things are, and to get a sense of the community before you really sort of commit. From there are membership programs that you can actually join up within itself, so you will get a membership card, and it is a fantastic way to join a community of like-minded individuals, as well as express your ideas and way to help out your community, but having the support from like-minded people across Canada that you maybe didn't have before. And if you haven't listened to more podcasts from these guys, it's been absolutely fantastic, and I can say personally, having listened to some of them, it is a great back catalog of stuff to listen to.
Thank you, Isla. And we'll be sure to link people. Always check our show notes, please. If you're not reading our show notes, you're missing out, because we link you to the guests and also the issues that we've talked about. All right. Thank you again, Isla, for taking time to come on and for organizing your community.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me on, and I appreciate it. And make sure to have a great day, everyone, and make sure to point always downrange.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.